Hello, General, and congratulations on your promotion. The top brass has given me the task of educating you on the factions, operations, people, and weapon systems seen during the events that span the 21st century war against the Global Liberation Army. This first video will simply act as a short introduction to key events that occurred right before the official outbreak of the war itself. I will also be bringing you up to speed on knowledge involving the gathering of supplies in order to generate funds, as well as the capturing and garrisoning of important structures and tech buildings seen throughout the various battlefields. So with all that said, let's begin. Much of the information we have in regards to major events that occurred right before the outbreak of the war comes from a report issued by the United Nations Security Council. I'll read the report verbatim, and pause to interject between lines if I think additional information needs to be provided. Security Council Subcommittee Resolution 1379 on Global Liberation Army. Report to Security Council. Situational Report on GLA Activities. Distribution: Classified. Hotan, China. For several months, observers have expressed concern over the activities of the Global Liberation Army, GLA. A loose federation of freedom fighters and terrorists, the GLA has established several strongholds in the republics of Central Asia. By distributing forces and leadership across the borders of these developing nations, the GLA has thwarted efforts to engage in meaningful dialogue. Last year, this group without borders crossed into Western China and began building popular support for an independent state in this remote region. GLA funding continues to grow from unknown sources, and its leadership remains a mystery. While the GLA's leadership may have been a mystery, there are a few key figures among the ranks of the organization. An explosives expert called General Rodal Jazi, a charismatic tribal leader named Prince Kassad, and an insidious but gifted scientist simply known as Dr. Thrax. More information about these three men and their roles within the GLA will be discussed in the future. For now, let's continue with the report. For the Beijing government, this incursion along its western border could not have come at a worse time. The reforms in China's Modern Way program have produced new civil liberties and excellent growth in Chinese exports, particularly in light manufacturing and agricultural products. Beijing has repeatedly stated that these changes are here to stay, a position that does not sit well with the GLA. We don't really have any exact details in regards to the Modern Way program, or the aforementioned reforms that took place within it. I think what we can conclude for certain is that these reforms began sometime in the 1980s and have continued to the present time of this report. These reforms may have involved abandoning some of the original hardline Maoist policies of the past, in favor of those that would allow China to prosper in the 21st century. The report mentions new civil liberties, but does not give any details as to exactly what those are. I'd say these changes were primarily economic ones, which, as mentioned, involved increased international trade, particularly with the exportation of agricultural and manufactured goods. While it is not mentioned, I believe another one of the aspects of this Modern Way program involved the modernizing of China's military. A few key generals seem to have risen up during this time period. An infantry tactics specialist named General Shen Fai, an impatient but smart nuclear technology general named Xing Shi Tao, and a former disciple of Soviet tank tactics during the Cold War, General Ta Hun Kwai. More information about these men will be discussed in the future. Such social and economic reforms during this time period boosted China's reputation with many other countries. It also garnered sympathy for them from the UN when the GLA began their incursions into Western China. Reading further into the report. Last week, the GLA struck a military depot at Yecheng, stole thousands of rounds of munitions, and destroyed a nuclear power plant. Dangerous levels of radiation have been detected over 100 kilometers downwind. The Chinese government is furious and has refused to allow observers to mediate discussions with the GLA. Several divisions of the Red Army have established positions in the province along major roadways and rivers. Yecheng, also known as Karjalik, is a county in western China under the administration of the Kashgar Prefecture, all within the Xinjiang Autonomous Region. To the west and northwest are the countries of Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, both of which had come under the control of the GLA. While the United States continues to provide orbital reconnaissance to the Security Council, it has failed to contribute troops to peacekeeping efforts in the region. The Council's refusal to support United States counter-terrorist initiatives in the Middle East in recent years has not been forgotten. USA military forces have remained in port and on base, venturing out only to secure its coastline. Scattered intelligence reports arriving from Europe and Asia indicate that the GLA has established and funded sleeper cells to further spread its sphere of influence. If China succeeds in forcing out the GLA, it is difficult to predict where the group will resurface. The United States would be the logical choice to buttress Chinese efforts to contain the GLA, but the United States continues to maintain its non-involvement in this matter. The United States denies the subcommittee's claim that eventually the GLA will cross paths with USA forces in Asia or elsewhere in the world. So at this point in time, the United States maintained a non-interventionist stance against the GLA, supposedly due to the UN Security Council not supporting its war on terror in various Middle Eastern countries at the start of the 21st century. But I think it's safe to say that there could be more to the situation than just that. One issue might have been the population of the US being tired of such wars, and whatever the current administration was at the time, being hesitant to get involved in a new one. There is also the matter of the US viewing China as an emerging competitive power on the world stage, and the GLA being a thorn in their side could certainly serve to indirectly benefit the US. If the US did get more involved though, the country had a few key generals it could rely on to fight on its behalf. The even-tempered yet uncompromising Air Force General Malcolm Granger, defense and superweapons expert Alexis Alexander, and last but not least, laser weapons expert General Towns. Again, more details on these generals and their arsenals will be provided in the future. While China had the military capabilities to push the GLA out of its territory, the Security Council was worried about the organization making its way west towards Europe. This is why the Council wanted the US to deploy its forces to act as a blockade against such movements, in order to keep the GLA contained to the Middle East, and prevent them from directly threatening Europe. Finally, for the last paragraph, the subcommittee recommends to the Security Council that it continue to maintain an open channel with the GLA, to establish a clear set of boundaries for Chinese activity, and to communicate the need for USA participation in peacekeeping initiatives before the Council loses its influence on the situation. As we know by now, the Council did, ultimately, lose all influence on the situation. It seems that all three of the major powers involved were not interested in finding a peaceful solution. The GLA ignoring, if not outright rejecting any talks of peace. China not wanting to hold back on any retaliatory strikes against the GLA. And the USA's reluctance to even get involved in the entire debacle in the first place. All this would eventually culminate in the GLA making a devastating attack on the Chinese capital of Beijing, which would be the catalyst that ignited the first major conflict against the GLA. Well, General, now that you're caught up to speed on the events that led to the conflict, I wanted to take some time to go over how each faction would generate additional funds for themselves, as well as having the opportunity to take control of various neutral tech buildings found at key locations on the battlefield. While all generals would receive an initial allocation of funds with which to fight their opponents on the battlefield, they were encouraged to seek out and find ways to generate additional funds. Their initial primary source of income came from supply docks. These docks were recognizable due to the high volume of shipping containers, crates, barrels, and boxes stacked on top of each other, all of which contained various amounts of resources and goods to support military operations on the battlefield. These resources included, but were not limited to, food, water, ammo, medical supplies, clothing, and various types of metals such as steel and aluminium. Of course, most of these resources could, and would, simply be processed at a faction-specific supply center and sold for cash. A full supply dock typically held a value of about 30,000 American dollars worth of supplies. Smaller caches of supplies could be found scattered throughout the battlefield. They were usually found close to a city, small village, or strategic checkpoint. These caches only held a value of about $3,750. Supply crates from the United Nations could also be found scattered throughout parts of the battlefield. These crates were originally intended to be delivered to local towns and villages as part of humanitarian efforts in the region, providing food, water, and medicine. However, generals looking to gain additional funds would procure these crates for themselves, as a means of supporting their operations in the area. The value of the crates varied, usually depending on their size. Crates could hold a value between $100 and $2,500. Each of the three major powers had their own preferred methods of collecting said supplies. Without going into too much detail, the US relied on CH-47 Chinook helicopters to pick up and transport the goods via a net. In this manner, they could carry about $600 worth of supplies. This number could be increased to $660 with the establishment of more efficient supply lines. China relied on large supply trucks. These vehicles couldn't carry as much as the Chinooks, only about $300 worth for each full load, but they were cheaper to build and purchase compared to the Chinooks. The GLA would rely on workers who were, let's say, coerced into collecting supplies for the organization. These guys could only carry one box at a time, that one box only typically being worth about $75. The workers do seem to be able to collect a slightly higher dollar value in supplies if they are outfitted with shoes to wear, about $83 worth to be precise, as well as being able to walk faster, increasing the rate at which said supplies could be gathered. Each faction also had their own unique direct method of collecting additional funds. For the US, this involved supply drop zones, where an AC-130 would fly over the marked location every 2 minutes to deliver crates of additional funds. In total, the pair dropped crates provided $1,500 worth of supplies. Just like with the Chinooks, this number could be increased to $1,650 if the American general established more efficient supply lines. For China, they would use specially trained hackers to siphon the internet for more money. Depending on the rank of these hackers, depends on the amount of funds they can gather each second. Rank 0 hackers gather $5 every few seconds. Rank 1s gather $6 at a slightly faster rate. Rank 2s gather $8, again at a slightly faster rate. And Rank 3 hackers are skilled enough to gather $10 every second. For better protection, hackers could be housed at a structure called the Internet Center, which had enough room for 8 of them. China's most famous agent, that being Black Lotus, could also directly hack into an enemy supply center or stash, stealing up to $1,000. 3-star Chinese generals could gain the ability to directly cash hack funds from an enemy supply center or stash. This ability had 3 levels to it, with level 1 able to steal $1,000 American dollars worth of funds, level 2 stealing $2,000, and level 3 stealing $4,000. These numbers are, of course, based off how much money the other faction actually has available. For example, if the enemy faction only has a total of $800 in funds, then Cash Hack will only steal that amount. For the GLA, they would set up a black market, where they would buy and sell weapons and other banned or illegal supplies. This kind of market would generate about $20 per second worth of transactions. The GLA could even establish multiple markets throughout an occupied area. Be wary though, as some of these markets could be decoys and booby-trapped with explosives. In addition, the GLA could pick up scrap from destroyed vehicles and sell it off for some extra cash. The GLA would also offer some of their battlefield commanders a cash bounty on any enemy units that they destroyed. There were 3 levels of this bounty, with level 1 being about 5% the cost of the destroyed unit, level 2 being worth about 10%, and level 3 being 20% of the cost. Another possible source of revenue that the major powers could make use of were oil derricks. These derricks were usually under the ownership of a third-party company, but they could be captured in order to provide extra funds to support combat operations on the battlefield. As soon as a derrick is captured, it immediately provides the new owner $1,000. So long as that general maintained control over said oil derrick, it would continue to generate about $200 every 12 seconds. For the USA, if their forces are able to establish supply lines, they could generate $220 every 12 seconds. Of course, where there are oil derricks, there may also be an oil refinery nearby. Instead of just selling off the crude oil generated from a derrick, it could instead be shipped over to the nearby refinery to be refined into fuel to be used in vehicles, thereby reducing the cost of vehicle production by 10%. If a general had many damaged vehicles out on the battlefield, but was unable to bring them back to base to be repaired, they could instead requisition a civilian repair bay in a nearby city or village. By capturing this structure, extra tools and parts could be brought over to vehicles to allow their crews to make active repairs to them, while still maintaining their positions on the front lines. Vehicles were not the only things needing repairs, or healing so to speak. Infantry who sustained wounds in battle would need access to medical supplies and facilities. Urban warfare provided generals the opportunity to capture nearby hospitals in order to provide enhanced medical support for their troops, allowing them to immediately gain first aid and healing right after an engagement. Another neutral structure that was a common sight throughout the various battlefields of the war were these abandoned artillery platforms. These platforms might have been originally set up and used in past wars. It turns out that some of the cannons on them still worked, and if captured and recrewed, they could act as an additional defensive platform on the front lines, or help cover the flanks of an established base. These cannons had both a maximum and minimum range. If enemy infantry or vehicles were able to get close enough to the structure, the cannon on top of the platform would be unable to fire down on them. The last neutral military structure was the reinforcement pad. These had a similar function to the artillery platforms, in that they may have been initially used in past wars. They could be captured and put back into service, in which they would be used to provide reinforcements to whatever general was in possession of it. The reinforcement would be airdropped onto the pad every 2 minutes, and it was always a vehicle of some kind. Usually, the vehicle would be a tank, but some generals required more specific vehicles as reinforcements. For example, USA General Malcolm Granger, who was not a big fan of tanks, would request that Humvees be paradropped on the pad, while GLA General Prince Kassad preferred quad cannons to be delivered, rather than the standard Scorpion tanks. Other military-related structures include bunkers that infantry could garrison. These bunkers were quite resilient to attacks, able to take a lot of punishment before finally being destroyed, unless the enemy used bunker buster bombs, bioweapons, or flamethrowers to clear them out. Civilian buildings would also be occupied by troops, especially during urban combat operations. There you have it, General. The events that led to the outbreak of the war, and how each faction's generals would generate income to further fund said war, including the requisitioning and use of other neutral tech structures to make use of on the battlefields. Keep in mind that there were other important events that occurred well before the war's outbreak, such as the Mudanjiang disaster in 2007, the Taiwan conflict in 2009, and the sinking of the USS Nelson in 2012, as well as other key events that will get mentioned in future videos. More information on the 3 major powers involved in the conflict, including the weapons, vehicles, and tactics each of them used during it, will also be provided to you in the future. But for now, General, know that the stage is set for one of the biggest conflicts of the 21st century.
In the modern world, great leaders resolve their conflicts with words. Step launcher.